Welcome back. When it comes to listing former prime ministers who have the most to say and the experience to back up the words, my next guest takes the prize. Brian Mulroney, progressive conservative prime minister from 84 to 93. He introduced the original free trade deal, attempted to bring Quebec into the Constitution with the Meech Lake Accord, and ratified significant environmental issues. That's why he was top of my wish list of guests for the final shows of the year. This is what I talked to him earlier this week. All right, former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney joins me from Montreal. I do want to talk about NAFTA. You did the original. The new NAFTA is about to be ratified. I'm curious what your view is of the revamped free trade deal. Is it better than the original?
I think it is. I think Ms. Freeland and her team did a very good job in the renegotiation, and I think it's a better product. A, than we had originally, and B, that was revised last year. And I think today's product is pretty good. It's certainly very good for Canada.
I do want to ask you, though, Canada on the world stage, you've cautioned that we shouldn't maybe be boasting that we're back on that stage, and I'm curious how we get on that stage, whether we want to be on that stage or if we're just sitting in the audience being a part of the spectators. Well,
I said that you shouldn't say Canada is back until you do something that backs that up. And you could start by paying our bills. We're way down the list on NATO. We committed to 2% of our GDP, and the last time any government in Canada paid 2% of GDP was mine, 25 or 30 years ago. And it's gone straight downhill ever since. We're at, I think, 1.2%, which is shameful in terms of peacekeeping, which distinguished Canada. In my 9 years in office, Don, there were 16 peacekeeping initiatives by the UN, and Canada participated in all 16 of them. Now, this was a concept drawn up by Lester Pearson, and it distinguishes Canada internationally, and we should have done it. And with regard to foreign aid, it's even worse. Mike Pearson presented a document 50 years ago saying that we should be paying 0.7%. We moved it up to 0.5%. En route to 0.7%, it's now gone all the way back down to something in the neighborhood of 1.5 or 2%. This is a disgrace. How are you going to assert your leadership skills when you enter a room and somebody says, hey, you haven't paid your bills? As John Manley said, I thought very exquisitely one day, he said in international meetings, when the bill comes around, Canada gets up and goes to the bathroom.
I remember that. What do you, help me understand.
That's not a good opener for a leadership bid.
So Trump's got a point, is what you're saying?
Yes, he has. He's complete on the NATO thing. He's completely right, and I've said that ever since he got into office 3 years ago.
How do we solve the problem with China? You get around the world quite a bit. I don't know, they're setting up a parliamentary committee, and they might actually be putting the Prime Minister on the witness stand there just to sort of air all our problems. But how do we get that relationship back on a firmer footing while we've got this extradition issue hanging over our heads?
Well, it's a tough one. There's no doubt about it, and there's no easy answer for it. And I like the idea of the parliamentary committee. The first witness they should call is David Mulroney. No relative, but he was one of the most outstanding ambassadors in our entire foreign affairs stable. And he's very practical, and he's got some great ideas as to how we can reconnect with China in a meaningful way. So he and a few other of the ambassadors would be a good place to start.
Would you be comfortable with a Prime Minister going before that committee, or you think that's not necessary?
Yeah, I think so. As you know, I recommended that Jean Chrétien and Andy Desmarais be sent over as special envoys of the Prime Minister to deal with the Chinese government at a high level. Chrétien knows all of these fellows, as I do and as other Prime Ministers do, on a personal basis. And he gets their attention, as opposed to a delegation of parliamentarians or something who will deal with people at the range of assistant deputy ministers. You don't want that. This has to be dealt with on a high level.
You remain, to this day, Elizabeth May still calls you our greenest prime minister, and we just finished the COP25 meetings, and I don't know if you think Canada's a laggard on that front still, or whether it's more aggressive. What needs to be done from Canada's point of view to fight climate change?
Well, you talk about being a laggard. The analysis of the G20 just came out on November 11th, and it showed that Canada was the second worst performer of the G20, just a little bit ahead of Australia, who was the worst. And we're not meeting our commitments to Paris. We're not meeting our undertakings at all. And so, yeah, there's a big job to be done there. And it all requires one thing: leadership. Somebody has to say, I am the prime minister, or I am the minister, and this is what we're going to do. And if there's objection to it, you say, all right, I'll take it to the people at the appropriate time. But we need leadership on all of these issues.
And you know, that brings a point back, circling back to the whole question of the Conservatives. Could they, and should they, be far more aggressive on the environment file, and maybe that gives them an advantage going into the next election, because it's becoming a bigger issue all the time?
Don, you may remember that in September, I made a statement saying that anyone who does not have an adequate, thoughtful, dynamic program to deal with climate change will not win an election in Canada. The reason being that the great middle class in our country, what they want to pass on to their children and grandchildren is a pristine environment. They don't want these niggling little tax cuts, so much for a pair of skates and so much for that. Yep. The great middle class in Canada principally wants a pristine environment, and they are going to vote for a party or a leader who articulates that kind of vision that satisfies their hopes and dreams for Canada and for their kids.
But that's not reflected in the Conservative Party we're seeing in Parliament right now.
Well, you saw what happened in the election. And if they want to have a repeat of that, go be my guest, because you're just not going to win an election unless you've got a thoughtful, grand vision for the future of Canada as it applies to the environment.
Okay, that's a great place to leave it. I guess I never thought I'd be retiring before you, so I guess you don't have any advice for me, do you?
Well, yes, I do. Come on in, Don. The water's fine. You're going to love it.
You're the busiest retired guy I know, so there you go. All right. Brian Mulroney, it's always been a pleasure having you on the show. I've really enjoyed our conversations, and some of the best conversations I've had with you have been after the camera's off, but, you know, those are fun, too.
Well, Don, if I could just say this, you have had a great run at this, and you've brought your personality and your background and your thoughtfulness to these debates and dialogues over your program. You've done a great job, and I wish you well.
All right. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.